Hello, team. Welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video. And myself, Jonathan MS Pearce, Ukraine War News Update, the second part thereof for the 2nd of February 2025. But it's not really a Ukraine War News Update. It's actually an American political and a geopolitical update that concerns Ukraine, but really is about this kind of economic war that has been waged on many of the allies of the United States and the insanity that this entails. It just beggars belief. So, at a time when we need to be as strongly supportive of Ukraine as a united front, at a time when Russia is in a serious situation and the economic boot is on its neck as well as a military boot, we can see that Russia is on a precipice. And if we are united together, we can allow Ukraine to prevail. We're at that moment. And yet, it's at that particular moment, right at that moment that the US turns around and declares war on its allies, economic war, potentially military war if you're talking about Greenland and maybe Panama and maybe Mexican cartels. Absolutely incredible. So we're going to start with looking a little bit at Elon Musk and some things going on there, and use that as a segue into this because there are some incredible things going on with Elon Musk with regard to the access that he has been granted with regard to social security benefits and stats and figures. That is mind-boggling. And remember the analogy I talk about, not quite analogy, but the way of thinking about this. Anything that anyone does, in this case, it's going to be Donald Trump or Elon Musk and the American government, the Trump administration. Think about two buckets. We're going to simplify it into two buckets. Is this action something that will promote transparency, that will degrade corruption, that will provide extra checks and balances to a government? Is this something that will provide guardrails for growing against, I would say, going off track and veering towards autocracy? Is this something that is pluralistic in terms of power and representation? I was just reading a book on populism, in fact, and we may well dip into that. Uh, uh, just, if you're talking about populism, it's worth probably having a little bit of a definition here, because what's going on in the United States, I think, is very easily defined as populism. Populism isn't so much an entire ideology, and this is something definitions here that will go. I've just highlighted a few parts to this because populism doesn't stand on its own. It's a way of delivering other ideologies. So, in the Oxford very short introduction to populism, populism is, and this is their main kind of definition, a thin-centered ideology that considers society to be ultimately separated into two homogeneous and antagonistic camps: the pure people versus the corrupt elite, and which argues that politics should be an expression of the volonté générale, the general will of the people. So this is about the people and their will being driven upwards rather than a corrupt elite going downwards. And it's about getting rid of the corrupt elite. It's about imposing the will of the people, but I would argue alongside manipulation of the will of the people. So you present yourself as some kind of savior for those people. And in the end, I think, denude them of the ability to be empowered themselves. In fact, populism almost always appears attached to other ideological elements, which is why you can get left wing and right wing populism, which are crucial for the promotion of political projects that are appealing to a broader public. Consequently, by itself, populism can offer neither complex nor comprehensive answers to the political questions and modern societies generate. In other words, it's not complex enough. It's thin-centered. There's not a lot to populism other than a mechanism of getting really a cult of personality. I would argue often. Um, it's why I think populism goes hand in hand with autocracy, to deliver what they claim is the will of the people, the populace. But it is I think often a way of delivering very simple answers to very complex problems. And I think we've seen that with Reform UK, with the modern iteration of the GOP in the United States, with um, Fico in Slovakia and Vucic and in Serbia and Orban in Hungary. Uh, it's this idea that immigration's a DEI or woke is what caused plane crashes. Really simplistic answers to complex problems, and then being able to sell that to your general population. This means that populism can take on very different shapes. It must be understood to be a kind of mental map through which individuals analyze and comprehend political reality. It is not so much a coherent ideological tradition as a set of ideas that, in the real world, appears in combination with quite different and sometimes contradictory ideologies. Um, the main fluidity lies in the fact that populism inevitably employs concepts from other ideologies, which are not only more complex and stable, but also enable the formation of subtypes of populism. In other words, you can get these different types of populism. So this is there are different ways of looking at it. You get elitism, which is this idea that elitists believe that the people are dangerous and dishonest. So the people down there are dangerous, dishonest, and vulgar, and that the elite that are superior are not only moral but also cultural in cultural and intellectual terms. Hence, elitists want politics to be exclusively and predominantly an elite affair in which the people do not have a say. They either reject democracy altogether or support a limited model of democracy. So this is the idea that I think that populism is set against that there is this kind of the political elite and the establishment and the deep state, and we need to get rid of it. And so we're just going to purge. But of course, it's an incredibly dangerous way to look at the world. And then you get another kind of non-populist. I mean, this would be what I would adhere to, loosely speaking, which is pluralism. So within pluralism, diversity, and it doesn't necessarily mean like the diversity like you would think it. It's just different demographic groups throughout society. So diversity is seen as a strength rather than a weakness. Pluralists believe that a society should have many centers of power, and this is really important for me, which gets away from the ability to harness power in one particular place, such as in an autocracy. So there are many centers of power, and that politics, through compromise and consensus, should reflect the interests and values of as many different groups as possible. Thus, the main idea is that power is supposed to be distributed throughout society in order to avoid specific groups, be they men, ethnic communities, economic, intellectual, military, or political cadres, etc., acquiring the capacity to impose their will upon others. So the checks and balances of pluralism is that power is somewhat maybe decentralized to a degree or spread out among different sort of groups, and there are different. For example, you might have in the US, you have the House of Representatives. You've got a trifecta. You've got the president, the Senate, and the House of Representatives. There's a kind of pluralistic way of running the country in terms of the organisation of Parliament. In the UK, you've got the House of Commons and the House of Lords, and then you've got the monarchy as well. So those are forms of pluralism. But if you start removing the ability for those entities to be able to do their work, then so for example, we have just seen that these executive orders that Trump has just released have been like tariffs have been started under um, uh, the rule that it's a national emergency. So the checks and balances of the House of Representatives and the Senate are taken away, and that's unilateral power of the president. And this you start getting into dangerous water when you start being able to do things like that routinely. So anyway, I think we're seeing a right-wing populism in the United States sweep the nation, and there are things that are taking place in US politics at the moment that are moving away from, um, I think, liberal democratic ideals and towards autocracy. So, which bucket do you put each of these decisions or events in? Do you put it in the it's moving towards transparency and getting rid of corruption and free and fair elections, etc., or is it towards concentration of power, obfuscation of where money is coming from, corruption, quid pro quo? etc., an autocracy. Which bucket are each of these things going in? So every single aspect of the news I'm going to discuss, think about that. Think about that always. Now, good news is that Susie Wiles, who is potentially a calmer head on in the Trump administration as the chief of staff for Donald Trump, has apparently given Elon Musk a bit of a brutal takedown. This is according to the Daily Mail some time ago. This is sort of a week ago now. She refused to grant him an office in the West Wing. So there's theories that he's going to get an office in the West Wing as an unelected bureaucrat. He did the Zeekhal a couple of times. Some people, some of you guys who love a bit of Elon Musk, like spend all your time trying to deny that this is the case and believe his nonsense. But the idea is, you know, if you're talking about giving your heart out to anyone, you're never you're going to be, that's a positive thing, and you're going to be, you know, it's calm and it's a beautiful thing. I'm giving my the grimace on his face as he slammed his fist, his outstretched hand up there twice in a row. That's not giving your heart out to someone. So if you want to fool yourself that that's what he was thinking, then, you know, so be it. I'm not going to convince you. You are just a cult follower of Elon Musk, and people like him can do no wrong. You know, I feel a bit sad for you. Elliot Higgins here from Bellingcat says, and again, you know, is this about abeyance in advance from the tech companies? Is this about doing what the dear leader wants? Is this about concentrating power in one place as opposed to pluralistically? So we hear that Meta tells the BBC, quote, "We're aware of an error affecting hashtags across the political spectrum, and we are working quickly to resolve it." In other words, Instagram, so what was happening is that Instagram, owned by Meta, was hiding search results for Democrats. And you're starting to have tech companies favoring Trump and the Republicans, and this is now stretched beyond. We know the coding has happened with Twitter. We know that. And now it appears to be something that has been found out in meta companies as well, such as Instagram. So again, is this helping pluralistic, democratic, liberal democratic ideals? A short stunning read here. A Twitter employee or an ex-employee on the H-1B visas. So it's the idea that Elon Musk wants these visas. Then he got into trouble with the MAGA. So then he comes out and attacks the UK and goes into all that race baiting with the grooming gangs as a form of diversion from the fact that he was trying to defend getting immigrant visas for immigrant workers. And then he did a couple of Zeekhals as well, and here we are. But this Twitter employee says, "I was part of a team that was directly ordered to manipulate Twitter systems to influence the 2024 US presidential election. It wasn't subtle, and it wasn't ethical." So here we have Elon Musk and X's role in the 2024 election interference, to whom it may concern. I'm writing this with a heavy heart and no small amount of fear. As former X, formerly Twitter employee on an H-1B visa, I can't reveal my identity without risking everything, but I can't stay silent any longer about what I saw and was made to do. When Elon Musk took over, everything changed. What started as a social media company became something much darker. I was part of a team that was directly ordered to manipulate Twitter systems to influence the 2024 US presidential election. It wasn't subtle and it wasn't ethical. We completely changed how the algorithm worked, pushing pro-Trump and right-wing posts on top of the people's feeds. To make it look balanced, we also boosted some left-wing critics of Democrats, but it was all carefully calculated. These changes didn't just affect Americans, it impacted users worldwide. One of the most disturbing things we did was create thousands of fake accounts using advanced AI systems called Grok and Eliza. These accounts looked completely real and pushed political messages that spread like wildfire. Haven't you noticed they all disappeared like magic? One of the most disturbing we also knowingly allowed foreign governments to manipulate the platform. State-backed groups from Israel, Iran, and Russia were running their own influence campaigns, and because their goals aligned with ours, we looked the other way. Even when they clearly broke the rules, we didn't stop them. Perhaps the most unethical part was how we manufactured news stories. One team would write completely fake articles, while another team would artificially boost their engagement metrics to make them go viral. We specifically targeted certain groups of people, knowing exactly how to manipulate their views and emotions. The moderation team became a tool for our agenda. We systematically silenced anyone who was in our way, enforcing the rules when it suited us and ignoring them when it didn't. Elon Musk himself was deeply involved in these decisions, often joking about being Black Hat MAGA. What started as a US election interference has now spread to other countries. We're currently doing the same thing in Germany and other European nations. The damage we've done is immeasurable, and I don't know if it can ever be fixed. People don't know what's real anymore, and that's exactly what we wanted. The pilot program for ELIZA AI agent was election interference. ELIZA was released officially in October 2024. We had to access to it before then, thanks to Mark Andreessen. I'm terrified to be writing this, but I had to speak up. I just hope that someone with the power to do something about this sees this letter. You'll know what I'm saying is the truth by Elon's actions. To the news, someone spoke out. For more evidence, look at the docs of ELIZA AI agent software. We left breadcrumbs. Yours sincerely, a former employee who can't sleep at night. And then there's some coding on there as well. And there a link to the ELIZA docs, so you can go and check that for yourself. Truly, truly worrying. And which pot does this go in? It's clearly the autocracy pot, the anti-democratic pot. Now, you've got Vivek Ramaswamy, a friend of, a sort of friend of Elon Musk, who was supposed to co-lead the Doge, the Department of Government Efficiency. He's had to step away because he was being a bit too pro-brown people. There's been friction between rank-and-file Doge staff and Vivek Ramaswamy, and Ramaswamy has been subtly encouraged to exit. He intends to announce a campaign for a higher governor as soon as the end of January. So that was interesting that happened. On his exit, quote, he played a critical role in helping us create Doge. He intends to run for elected office soon, which requires him to remain outside of Doge based on a structure that we announced today. We thank him immensely for his contributions over the last 2 months, Trump transition spokesperson Anna Kelly said. So here is someone that was just being, unfortunately for him, a little too pro brown people, and he was hoisted out. And that was all to do with the H-1B visas as well. Okay, now, if you're thinking how wonderful this tech billionaire unelected mogul is, the guy that keeps blaming immigrants and the most vulnerable in society, anyone's okay with that, but acts like they don't care about our debts and deficits is gaslighting you. Tesla paid zero federal income tax in 2024, despite $2.3 billion in income. And don't forget, they get an awful lot of funding through subsidies from the US government, and he's right in the middle of that and wanting more. So this is incredible. This brings Tesla's average tax rate over the past 3 years to a whopping 0.4%. Okay. And this, someone's done this. This is my favorite. Although someone's changed it to him having a mountain of cookies here. Another one's he's sitting there in the middle with a pile of cookies. Careful, mate. That foreigner wants your cookie. And he's, this poor working class white guy is resenting this brown skinned guy because he wants your cookie. It's a zero sum game. Meanwhile, Rupert Murdoch sits on all of those cookies. That is basically how to understand these billionaires at the top of the unelected hierarchy inside, if you like, the US government at the moment. Now, for all of Trump's talk of manufacturing jobs, you didn't see any of the CEOs of General Electric, Caterpillar, and whatnot taking the prime seats in the inauguration. You saw CEOs of Amazon and X and Meta and Google and TikTok. It's the attentional oligarchs whose power he cares about. And this is Ezra Klein here, and I've got a lot of time for Ezra Klein. I hope the upside of Musk's turn to the right was he might sell Republicans on electric vehicles, but instead he's offering this salute to a new president who only mentioned EVs today to promise, quote, we will revoke the electric vehicle mandate. My goodness. So, Musk has, I think, given up on his dreams of, electric vehicle revolution, and I think he's just questing after raw power now. So on kind of free speech, this is Carl Kulinski from Secular Talk. Trump says he'll bring free speech back to America. It's just worth remembering what he has done in terms of free speech. He recently sued Ann Seltzer for a poll that he didn't like. He sued CBS for how it edited a Kamala Harris interview. More on that in a minute, because we now find out, is it worth talking about that? No, we're going to come back to that, because we now found out that Fox edited his Barbershop interview, or his Barbershop town hall, if you like. This is Donald Trump completely edited out all the rambling mess that was in that. So we found out now, and what you're left with was a mess anyway. So he's sued CBS, extracts money out of CBS, but does exactly the same thing. There's always projection with Trump. Sued Simon and Schuster for Bob Woodward book because it quoted him. He threatened to de-license news outlets that criticize him. He wants to punish flag burning with a year in jail. He sued CNN for 475 million for calling the election denialism the big lie. Sued Bill Maher for a $5 million joke, or for $5 million over a joke. Supports opening up the libel laws to sue journalists. Called for jailing journalists who reported on the SCOTUS abortion ruling. Wants to deport pro-Palestine protesters. Gag ordered the EPA from telling the truth on climate change. Arrested and charged 6 journalists with felony rioting. Didn't pardon us Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, or Daniel Hale. Wanted to invoke the Insurrection Act to deploy US troops against George Floyd protesters, and called to terminate all rules, regulations, and articles in the Constitution over his election loss. He is the most anti-free speech president in modern American history. Complete authoritarian and a con man fraud, says Carl Kulinski. And I couldn't agree more. Like, if you think that he stands for free speech, all that means is, just like Elon Musk, he stands for speech that is able, he stands to be able, he wants to be able to insult people and denigrate people that he doesn't like. But as soon as he's on the receiving end of that, he wants to shut you down. This man is not at all interested in free speech. He's a classic authoritarian, and he wants to be a dictator. And Elon Musk wants to be there for him. Now, this is where we start getting into really troubling, again, which pot are you going to put this in? Really troubling news that is coming out with many, many, many sources at the moment. No one voted for Elon Musk. No one confirmed Elon Musk. And why does he have this level of power over our government? So, an exclusive: Musk aides have locked government workers out of computer systems at a US agency. Sources say. A bit more detail on this. This is what a police state does. New Elon Musk friends have infiltrated the GSA and are looking for ways to use White House credentials to access agency tech, potentially allowing them to remote into laptops, read emails, and more, sources say. And that's coming from Wired. And Musk surrogates are reportedly seeking access to Treasury Department's payment systems. This is the one that has really, really shocked people. They want to take your money you've paid into Social Security and give it to billionaires. We told you this, says Alex Gold. Now, I don't quite know what the reasons are for this, but he is getting involved massively in ways that he really, really shouldn't. As this source says, some people voted for Trump. Some people voted for Kamala. Some people voted third party, but I guarantee you that nobody voted for a fucking billionaire to be raiding our Social Security. What the F is this BS? New York Times reports Elon Musk's team has granted access to Treasury Department payment system. The Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is said to have given representatives of the so-called Doge full access late on Friday. Now, if you find it acceptable that all that data, if you're worried about privacy, right? If you think it's okay for an unelected billionaire oligarch to have access to all of that data, all that sensitive American data, then I assume you're just a massive hypocrite. Because if that had been George Soros accessing that data, you would have absolutely spat at the screen incandescent with rage, no doubt. This is really scary times we're living in. Now, Jake Bro then says the richest man in the world is having his Tesla engineers steal every American's social security number, birthday, home address, and bank account information. We're in serious trouble. So this is a source here, Alt National Park Service, saying Elon Musk staff have been caught installing hard drives inside the Office of Personal Management, the OPM, the Treasury Department, and the General Services Administration, the GSA. His staff encountered resistance when demanding that Treasury officials grant access to systems managing the flow of more than $6 trillion annually to programs like Social Security and Medicare. Tensions escalated when Musk's aides were discovered at OPM accessing systems, including a vast database known as the Enterprise Human Resources Integration, EHRI, which contains sensitive information such as dates of birth, Social Security numbers, performance appraisals, home addresses, pay grades, and length of service for government employees. In response to employees speaking out, Musk's aides locked civil servants out of computer systems and offices with reports of personal items being searched. Is this a democracy? Is the US veering into a police state, some kind of weird oligarchic police state? where the powers rest in the billionaires, and the poor and working class are having their identities and information stolen from them, and eventually their money. I- I'm absolutely staggered by what is going on. It is truly, truly disturbing. Okay, so I could talk about lots of other things to do with Musk and Cash Patel and QAnon. We'll see what happens in there, and so on and so forth. But we're actually going to go on to what's going on at the moment with uh, the politics of tariffs and some of the other things going on in the Trump administration that are truly disturbing. And we're going to go back to those two pots. Which of these two pots do each of these events kind of represent, or would you put these events in? So it's worth reminding ourselves, and Ian Bassin here says, this is what the world's autocrats do. And this is going back in time to one of actually someone that Trump really likes, because he is originally democratically elected and then backsliding and then controlling media and judiciaries and so on and so forth. Turkey's Erdogan begins a new term with the purge of 18,600 civil servants. And this is what you do when you do not want to relinquish your power. This is what you do when you have guardrails that you want to remove. This is what you do when you have checks and balances that are going to be obstacles for continued autocratic dissent. I, you may have a go at me, some of you, and yes, oh, Trump this, Trump that, mate. If this is what you want happening in your country, wherever you're from, then you love a bit of autocracy, and you're not my kind of guy. We're not going to get on, because if you advocate for moves like this, then you are advocating going towards what Putin has. And if that's what you like, we're living on in different dimensions. Now, remember when they called us alarmists for predicting that a second Trump term would be a total disaster? No one would be able to stop him. We've only made it through the second week, and as Mediaite headline says, FBI agents involved in Trump cases are escorted out of offices in a Friday night purge. Indeed, breaking news, 88 FBI agents who worked on the Trump cases were just physically escorted out of the Washington field office. This is what happens when you destroy the Constitution and try to turn America into a banana republic. Now, on one hand, you might understand why people investigating the new president, he's not going to want them around, but the FBI is doing what they're told to do and investigating, and that's just people following orders. Nonetheless, breaking news, it's much worse than previously reported. Not only were at least 30 federal attorneys who worked on January the 6th cases fired, but all 6 of the FBI's most senior executives and multiple heads of field offices have been escorted out. This is terrifying. So it's actually a bit more fundamental than people that just investigated Trump. You've got a mass purge, and the expertise and the knowledge that goes with these people going is going to be phenomenal. Mehdi Hassan says, it's only been 12 days, but we've seen enough to know that those of us who warned of authoritarianism and a wannabe autocracy were 100% correct. And the idiots who said we were exaggerating were guilty of complacency, ignorance, and yes, idiocy. What the hell is this? How is this okay? Message, and this is he's reacting to Nick Schwellenbach here, Schwellenbach, saying, message to the whole FBI workforce from acting director Brian O'Driscoll. Colleagues, we understand there's a lot of media reporting rumors surrounding potential changes in the FBI. This includes reporting rumors about actions that are very seriously impact our workforce, consistent with our commitment to share information with you as we receive it. Acting Deputy Director Kassane and I wanted to provide you with an update. Late this afternoon, I received a memo from the Acting Deputy Attorney General notifying me that 8 senior FBI executives are to be terminated by specific dates unless these employees have retired beforehand. I've been personally in touch with each of these impacted employees. The memo also directs me to provide by noon on Tuesday, February the 4th, the following, quote, all current and former FBI personnel are assigned at any time to investigations and or prosecutions relating to 1. Events that occurred on, at, or near the United States Capitol on January the 6th, 2021, and 2. United States v. Hanier et al. 24th Mag 438 SDNY. Southern District, New York. These lists should include relevant supervisory personnel in FBI regional offices and field divisions, as well as FBI headquarters. So, when you've got people attacking the Capitol and storming into the seat of power in the US, and you investigate that, you lose your job for investigating that. It's insanity, absolute freaking insanity, this. Um, Yes, these lists should include relevant supervisory personnel and FBI regional offices and field divisions, as well as FBI headquarters for each employee, including the list. Provide the current title, office of which a person was assigned, role of the investigation or prosecution, and date of the last activity relating to the investigation or prosecution. Upon timely receipt of the requested information, the Office of the Deputy Attorney General will commence a review process to determine whether any additional personnel actions are necessary. End quote. We understand that this request encompasses thousands of employees across the country who have supported these investigative efforts. I'm one of those employees, as is Acting Deputy Director Kassane. As we said, since the moment we agreed to take these roles, we are going to follow the law, follow FBI, um, uh, follow FBI policy, and do what's in the best interest of the workforce and the American people, always. We will be back in touch with more information as soon as we can. In the meantime, stay safe and take care of each other. Brian J. Driscoll Jr. Um, just who would have thought we'd be at this place? It's just incredible. Now, Trump has also, again, which pot would you put this in? Which pot would you put this in? Trump also granted provisional security clearances to White House staff, blaming the regular process for taking too long. So when you apply to be White House staff, you have to go through security clearances to make sure that you aren't compromised, that there are checks and balances in place to stop people who should not be in roles being put in those roles. Okay. However, in this case, we have Trump unilaterally deciding that his people can bypass security clearances and he can just put them in place. Elizabeth Landers here saying another executive order just signed, given the White House gives the White House counsel the full authority to give interim top secret security clearances to whomever the president wants for up to 6 months. We are seeing the United States move towards an autocracy. And if you disagree, my goodness, you have double standards. Because if the Democrats did any of this, you would shat your pants. I dare a single one of my viewers to think that all of this is acceptable. Any of this is acceptable. Any single one of these points is acceptable. Put it in the thread below, and I'll tell you how you're bloody wrong and how you've got double standards. If you're a fan of Trump, you are a fan of autocracy. If you're a fan of Trump, you hate democracy. If you're a fan of Trump, you're a fan of corruption. I don't see it any other way. Trump revokes Pentagon officers of 4 media outlets. Now, I wanted to speak to you about a week ago about this, and I was lying in bed at night in Ukraine, thinking one of the things I bet Trump does is going to be starting to phase out mainstream media and replace them with his favored sort of right-wing media outlets and influencers. And then we heard the other day that he's going to remove one of the mainstream media outlets from the White House press room and have a rotating seat, I think, for like right-wing influencers, something like that. And now we're hearing this. So Trump has revoked Pentagon offices. So these are where they actually have offices in the Pentagon for 4 media outlets, including the New York Times and NBC, replacing them with Trump-aligned New York Post, OANN, Breitbart, and HuffPost. Now, 3 of those are distinctly very right-wing. HuffPost, I don't know if it's had a change of ownership and is now aligned with Trump, something like that. The Pentagon has announced plans to rotate out the New York Times, NBC News, NPR, and Politico from their offices at the Pentagon. In their place, Breitbart, OANN. OANN is like a Newsmax, but even worse. It's like Fox times 5. The New York Post and HuffPost will take over. Another classic authoritarian move to replace independent outlets. Now, I wish I'd bloody spoken to you about this because I predicted this, and literally within like 5 days it happens. And it's like, because I'm like, this is, if I wanted to be a dictator, having been voted in after a democratic process, this is exactly the sort of thing I would do. I want my media in there. I want to get rid of inspectors general, which he's done, 30 odd inspectors general. So they're the people that checks and balances. He gets rid of FBI, loads of the FBI that are holding, the government to account and investigating wrongdoing. Get rid of them. It's all the pieces of the jigsaw are being put in place. But this is an absolute classic authoritarian move to replace independent outlets with friendly media that will only praise the regime. It's incredible. So here he goes. Here you see it all there. Yeah, it is. This is not good news at all. Replacing NPR with Breitbart. Now, some on the far right are going to be like, "Oh, NPR, is a government news organization, public broadcaster, left wing." Just grow up. It's not the case. If you think NPR is comparable to Breitbart, then you're an absolute muppet. Right. So, and then it's this. I'd advise anyone goes out and reads Jason Stanley's How Fascism Works, and you get this unreality. Unreality is a great example, but also just a lack of. The problem with Trump is he's got a lack of knowledge. I keep talking about this. He doesn't know enough stuff, and he keeps. There's a lot of people saying he's got even greater cognitive decline at the moment, which is really interesting. People saying he's really struggling with sentences, hence the kind of Fox News editing out a whole load of his absolute drivel. And yeah, so here's an example.
Executive orders, you would agree that it's never acceptable to assault a police officer.
Sure.
Right? So then if I can, among those you pardoned DJ Rodriguez, he drove a stun gun into the neck of a DC police officer who was abducted by the mob that day. He later confessed on video to the FBI and pleaded guilty for his crimes. Why does he deserve a pardon?
Well, I don't know. Was it a pardon? Because we're looking at commutes and we're looking at pardons. Okay, well, we'll take a look at.
So you pardon all the January 6th protesters, and you've now got rid of all the FBI who investigated them. Here's a guy that stuck a stun gun into a policeman's neck and then admitted to it. Would you agree it's never acceptable to assault police officers? Sure. So he agrees it's never acceptable, and then there's just pardoned this guy. And then he says, why did he deserve a pardon? I don't know. What is going on here? What is going on? What is going on?
But I can say this, murderers today are not even charged.
So it's nothing to do with anything. Answer the freaking question. I would say, sorry, Trump. Sorry, sir. Sorry, Mr. President. That's not what I'm talking about. Why have you pardoned this guy? Trump needs to be sat down and interviewed by someone that absolutely holds his feet over the frickin' fire. That man's feet need to be as orange as his face.
You have murderers that aren't charged all over. You take a look at what's gone on in Philadelphia. Take a look at what's gone on in LA.
Irrelevant.
People murder people and they don't get charged. These people have already.
Shut up. Not going to listen to you anymore. So it's not acceptable that he gets to do that. So the president pardoned about 1,500 January 6th defendants and commuted the sentences of 14 more, and almost 400 people were charged with assaulting police officers or others, meaning some of his pardons were to violent offenders. And this was only was it a week after J.D. Vance has said he's never going to pardon the people who committed the most violent. Of course, he's not going. I think he said, of course, he's not going to pardon them, and he then went and did exactly that. So J.D. Vance's claims are worth nothing. And again, as someone said, breaking in a stunning moment of incompetence, Donald Trump just completely failed to answer why he pardoned someone who used a stun gun to assault a police officer. This is insane. And I think this is all pretty insane in the moment. Then you've got, I do love a bit of Michael Spicer. If you don't know who Michael Spicer is, he's a British comedian, comic actor, who often has these the room next door, where he's supposed to be like listening, and he's the advisor of, in this case, President Trump, but he does it with UK politicians more often. And he's like, no, okay, what do you want to say is this? No, okay, well done. And then it's all very satirical, but he points out so brilliantly in Trump talking about the FAA and the plane crash why Trump is just, first of all, dangerous. I mean, it's a whole 5-minute skit just to give you a sort of flavor. It goes something like this:
the massive search and rescue mission was underway throughout the night, leveraging every asset at our disposal.
Yep, that's it. Just keep to the facts. Just tell them the facts.
We do not know what led to this crash, but we have some very strong opinions.
No, we don't. We don't have opinions. Not now, just facts.
And I think we'll probably state those opinions now.
No, we won't.
I changed the Obama standards from very mediocre at best to extraordinary.
What does that mean?
You remember that?
No, no one does.
But I do want to point out that...
Oh no, what are you doing?
Various articles that appeared prior to my entering office.
If you're talking about that one article by Fox News, can you just put it away?
And here's one. The FAA's diversity push includes...
So anyway, it goes on. It's very, very well done, as it always is. And one of the interesting things about this is how he points out that Trump says, and he said, I've got various articles. And he's actually only got one article, but he quotes from it various times and calls them separate articles. And it gives you the impression that he's quoting many places where something's wrong. And this is a very poorly written single Fox News article that was a complete bastardization of the truth, right? And he goes, and here's another article, and just quotes from that same article a little bit further down. And anyway, Michael Spicer points this out. So you've got Trump just essentially flat out lying. He's just lying to his audience again. And we live in this era of disinformation where I'm so freaking fed up of disinformation. And yet it's coming from the very top of the US administration. It is a disturbing time that we live in. And it is not cool. But, you know, comedians often are some of the best at, you think of Jon Stewart, you think of John Oliver on Last Week Tonight, and the amount of work they put into debunking or illustrating real problems, endemic problems often within American society with John Oliver. These people are often some of our very, very greatest of analysts and communicators of what is troubling. Here, Michael Spicer is doing that in his own inimitable way. Anyway, talking about this, let's just go to Senator Tim Kaine.
I think the president was race baiting to take attention away from this. He let Elon Musk force the resignation of the FAA administrator at the beginning of the administration. He disbanded on day 2 of the administration an aviation safety committee within DHS, and the reason for disbanding it is we want to focus on national security. What air safety isn't national security? He has got an OMB director who was pushing a hiring freeze and federal funding pauses, saying, I want to traumatize the federal workforce when we already have too few air traffic controllers. This president is starting off just within a week and a half an anti-safety agenda that is going to hurt our air safety, and he desperately did not want to be asked about that. I think that's why he went the race baiting route, because he realized, wow, we just sacked the FAA administrator, we just sacked the Aviation Safety Board. Man, they're going to come after us. We better blame somebody else.
It's incredibly scary what is going on. And then you had this other situation that happened, which is just insanity. Like, who is this Trump deciding things unilaterally that are bonkers, and then other people going, okay, we better do that, but it sounds a bit bonkers? Or does he have absolute idiots around him? I don't know. So you had the whole California fire thing, and as Shashank Joshi says, this is real Mad King stuff. Quote, it was not immediately clear how or where the federal government intends to transport the water. So what you had was these 2 dams that were released, and water in order to try and get water down into Southern California, except it's not what happened, and it was a massive cock up, and it flooded all these farm fields, and now they're going to have a lack of water for those farm fields in the summer when there will be a drought. Just absolute insanity, as it is trying to PR stunt to try and solve things. These guys can't govern. They're idiots. Some of these people are just utter idiots. So the US Army Corps of Engineers abruptly increased the amount of water flowing from 2 California dams. Federal agency made a decision after President Trump signed an order calling for increased water deliveries. Local water managers who were caught off guard by the action said they convinced Army Corps officials to release less water than originally planned, but it was still a bit of a disaster. Remember how Trump said he sent the military in and opened up the water flow in California? It appears that he forced the Army Corps to just drain reservoirs into recently flooded farmland without telling local farmers or leaders. Quote, in 25 years, I've never seen anything like this. I was given no explanation at all. End quote. Rumors are that local Republicans are panicked over the screwing of their constituents. Nothing but chaos meddling in local water management from the White House. It's just absolutely insane. Trump's emergency water order, responsible for water dump from Tulare County lakes. The water is hundreds of miles from the fires. It is in helping put out fires at all. It's just a political stunt, so he can say he did something. Tulare County water managers were perplexed and frustrated, noting both physical and legal barriers that make it virtually impossible for Tulare County river water to be used in Southern California fires. He just wanted to make a splash and just insane decisions. It's just so incompetent. And then, you got people starting to wake up to this kind of insanity. Here is this is Sean Casten, I believe.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, step right up and prepare to be amazed. This is an ordinary folder. As you can see, no hidden compartments, and yet inside, it's an invisible rabbit. If you like that trick, you are going to love Donald Trump's national energy emergency. It's also totally imaginary, but as any good carnival barker will tell you, there's a sucker born every minute who falls for the shtick. Let's review the numbers. Under the Biden administration, U.S. created 16 million jobs, had the fastest growing economy in the OECD, held oil demand flat, drastically cut coal use, embraced cleaner, cheaper renewables and efficiency. We decoupled economic growth from fossil fuel, giving American people more heat, more light, more power, more money. That put downward pressure on domestic oil and gas prices, which caused domestic fossil producers to export into less developed, more remunerative overseas markets. Now, before you say, there's no emergency here, consider this from the perspective of our poor oil and gas producers. They're losing market share. They're making less money, but they got an ally in Donald Trump. After all, he's the guy who forced the Saudis to curtail production in 2020 to drive up oil prices and oil industry profits. That's right. He made sure U.S. consumers paid more for gasoline. Ta-da! Don't be a sucker, but if you are, I am available for parties and I can solve all your invisible rabbit problems. You can keep hopping, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
Wow. Fake emergencies to be ordered to, in order to be able to ram through executive orders and really on the behest of the fossil fuel industry. Again, paid lobbyists and moneyed interests at the heart of the government. So then we had this Fox News edited Trump's rambling answers and false claims in a barbershop interview. Full video shows. So the full video has been, I guess, leaked from Fox News, and it is very clear that Trump doesn't have a clue what he's talking about. So his answers are anyone that thinks he's clever or knowledgeable when he admits he doesn't read anything. Like, how do you get knowledgeable if you never read? Like you're only as knowledgeable as the amount of information you can take in from what you are told by other people, in little snippets here and there. There's no like a depth of knowledge. Like I'm reading a book on populism, an academic book on populism, and this will be all the knowledge on this one kind of ideology or political label, movement, whatever you want to call it. And that's how I get knowledgeable on this very one narrow subject area. I mean, if you've got someone that's never read a book, then how do they hope to? Yeah, I just don't understand. The guy isn't knowledgeable, and he's in the most important job role in the world. And anyway, it's complete projection, of course. Whenever he accuses other people of doing something, it's because he's done it himself. So he's taken CBS to court for doing something completely normal. So what happened, if you remember, CBS interviewed for 60 minutes, I think it was, Kamala Harris. But for every interview, and I know this because I've just done it in Ukraine. So I had to interview units for each handover of a NAFO truck. And I did a 10 to 15 minute interview knowing that 2 to 3 minutes will be used in the final cut for the video for NAFO, for Help 99. And so lots of that stuff ends up on the cutting room floor. Okay, never to be seen. Which is why I got one of my guys to film one of those as a whole, just so you could see all the questions I asked. And I put that up the other day. 60 minutes, interviewed Kamala Harris. And then for the trailer for the interview, they put a slightly different clip that they didn't include in the main segment of the 60 minutes interview. And Trump was like, they've cut it. That doesn't appear in there. Therefore, this is, they've cut out some of the rambling or whatever it was, and accused him of editing the interview. And I was like, well, yeah. So then took them to court, literally sued them over this. It's like, well, of course we edit. Like, literally every interview is just, anyway, insanity. And of course, This has happened to Trump with Fox News, but nothing. No court cases about that. Nothing happens about that because the rest of the other side are kind of sane, and you don't go. We don't go to Trump. Oh, we're going to sue you for that because that's stupid. But for Trump, anything that's stupid, there's some kind of financial or power gain that you gets from that. Like the stupidity is in like rationality of the sense of that prima facie in and of itself, rather than as a way to flex and to get in this case CBS and parent companies to genuflect to you. Now, Secretary Rubio is heading to Panama to uphold the Monroe Doctrine. Problem is, Trump has the doctrine backwards. Rejecting outside influence in the Western Hemisphere means getting tough on China, not on Panama. In his first term, Trump allowed China to renew leases for marine terminal operations in the Canal Zone and build big infrastructure throughout Latin America. So far in his second term, he's rolled over on TikTok, backed down on his Chinese tariff threats. He's only given 10% tariffs against China, but 25% against Canada and Mexico. So you know who his mates are. And allowed the Communist Party to buy up his net worth in meme coins. Rubio and Trump need to stop bullying a small ally and start finding a spine against America's actual adversary, the Chinese Communist Party. So again, is this, which pot would you put this in? Is this about global strategic, is this about democracy globally? Or is this kowtowing to other autocratic regimes, in this case, China? So now we're getting on to the trade war. Trump starts a pointless trade war. Canada threatens to retaliate by withholding electricity from the US. Trump's press secretary says this is fine because Jesus didn't have electricity. Literally the dumbest possible timeline. This is absolutely incredible, this. And it blows my mind that this kind of stuff is going on. So she said, when asked about, the article here says, when asked about the tariff war between Canada and the United States after the Prime Minister of Canada said he would consider cutting off electricity to America if Donald Trump continues to impose tariffs, she referenced Jesus Christ. Quote, this is the press secretary for the White House. They want you to panic, but President Trump wants you to remember Jesus didn't have electricity either, and he did just fine, Levitt said. And this is where we're at. So I don't know. As Mark Hartling here says, stating the obvious, Canada, Mexico, and China are our top three trading partners and combined provide 40% of our imports. Economic strength is one of four elements of national power: economic, diplomatic, military, and information. It won't be long before the economic policies negatively affect the other three. It is all very worrying, isn't it? Right. This is Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, who's absolutely awesome. Attorney from, from Texas, but I don't know if that's where her seat is, or she's from somewhere else and her seat is in Texas. Forgive me for getting that, for not remembering. Did Trump just say he will put tariffs on medications? Americans already pay more for prescription medications than anywhere in the world, and he wants us to pay even more. Americans want cheaper drug prices. Trump is giving us higher taxes instead.
In addition to that, and you see the power of the tariff. I mean, the tariff is good, and nobody can compete with us because we have by far the biggest piggy bank. And so that'll take place very quickly. But also we'll be doing...
Before we get on to his point about pharmaceuticals, interesting there that we'll be okay because we've got the biggest piggy bank. You're still using up your piggy bank. So be warned about like simplistic analogies like this, because actually they don't really do justice to the situation, which is that I'm going to put all these tariffs on all these nations, and we'll be able to withstand these tariffs more than the other nations, who will then capitulate. What for? Not really sure. It's just flexing. Like the idea that Canada's all about fentanyl is a load of rubbish. You wouldn't put 25% tariffs across the board on Canada for just 0.1% of fentanyl drug imports or smuggling. Just absolutely insane. And so this is about wanting Canada to be crippled, to capitulate to the United States, so he can invade Canada. I mean, this is just massively aggressive imperialistic activity. It's just incredible. But the point here is that he said, well, we got a bigger piggy bank. Yeah, so it's still going to cost you. That's like It's all right, guys. I mean, we'll be screwed, but we won't be as screwed as them. Or you could just allow the American economy to keep ticking along just fine. Biden had got the American economy to one of the best in the world. All the stats are great. Numbnuts comes along. It's like, oh right, let's fix something that's not broken. So let's have a trade war with. Who should you have a trade war with? I don't know, Mr. President. How about everyone? Everyone. That's a great idea. Let's have a trade war with everyone. So who's up north? Canada. Yep. Hate them. Trade war. I want to take them over. 51st state. Who's down south? Mexico. Yeah. Screw them. Smugglers and fentanyl and drug cartels. Yeah, take them. How about anyone further south? Yeah, you got Panama and there's Colombia as well. Yeah, let's have a bit of a to do with Colombia and Panama as well. They got that big watery thing, haven't they? Yeah, we'll have that. Anyone else? We're thinking maybe Greenland. Greenland's a bit of a laugh, isn't it? Yeah, Greenland. Let's go and have that. Let's who owns Greenland? Is it? I hope it's not China or Russia. No, it's one of our close allies, Denmark. Excellent. I love to screw over close allies. Let's take Greenland. So we're gonna, threaten Denmark militarily, economically. It doesn't really matter. And who are our friends over there? What are they called? Is that the EU, Mr. President? Yeah, the EU. Yeah. Screw them. Let's have a tariff war with them. Yeah. Mr. President, I was wondering about whether we should do anything about Russia. No, not really. How about China? A little bit, 10% tariffs maybe, but not as much as Canada. Screw Canada. Stupid Canadians. And that is a synopsis of what's going on in the world at the moment. Absolutely incredible.
Pharmaceuticals. And to bring our industry back, we want to bring pharmaceuticals back to the country. And the way you bring it back to the country is by putting up a wall, and the wall is a tariff wall. We were the richest country in the world. We were at our richest from 1870 to 1913. That's when we were a tariff country. In addition to that,
something quite interesting to look at there. Again, Trump really doesn't know what he's talking about. Quick look back at America's historical tariffs. This week, tariffs are back in the spotlight, with the US set to hike duties on imports from familiar names. China, Canada, and Mexico. Supporters of these policies often point to the late 19th century as a golden era when high tariffs supposedly fueled America's industrial dominance, but peel back the layers of American history, and you'll find a far messier reality behind the enduring debates over tariffs, from Alexander Hamilton's carefully balanced proposals for nurturing infant industries to the economically disastrous Smoot-Hawley debacle, which is, across the board tariffs. Even before the ink dried on the Constitution, trade was a battleground. Blah, 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 blah. But essentially, you've got these different periods here, this is what Trump is talking about with regard to tariffs. These are kind of tariff rates on dutiable imports. And then you had, that's 1913, so sort of to there, he's talking about that period. And then you had the Smoot-Hawley, where you had even higher tariffs, but it's completely disastrous. So it's not true, essentially, what he's saying with regard to how successful tariffs are. And then you get the correlation fallacy and things going well, not because of tariffs, but because of other things. And then you can say tariffs are responsible for that, blah, blah, blah. Talks about all that here. Here we are in 2025, revisiting the same arguments. Advocates of protectionism cling to the idea of tariffs as a panacea for economic insecurity, even as supply chains grow more intricate and global markets are more intertwined. History warns us of the costs: high consumer prices, retaliatory measures, and stifled innovation. But the siren song for tariffs, promising quick fixes and national pride, remains as seductive as ever. So did tariffs build America, or did they merely mask deeper economic transformations driven by immigration, technological advancement, and capital investment? And that's a whole kind of correlation against causation. So just, be warned when Trump opens his mouth at all, actually, to make any kind of big claims. Anyway, moving on. So what's it about? What are these tariffs about? This is really what it's about, says Ron Filikowski. Nothing to do with border security. He is an ignorant, vengeful, demented, megalomaniacal narcissist. Donald Trump says, we pay hundreds of billions of dollars to subsidize Canada. It's not subsidization, right? He doesn't understand what a subsidy is, and it's not it. Trade deficit is when you import more than you export, and at different times depending on what you need, no country has zero kind of trade deficit or a completely balanced trade book. Okay, you are always going to be importing more or exporting more than another country, and that's just the way it goes. The US is going to be getting stuff in because it needs to create loads of stuff, so it builds an awful lot of stuff to export, but also consume inside. Like, the US has a lot of very rich people. It's got a lot of poor people as well. But, the GDP per capita and the consumption per capita and all sorts of things, you have to look at the amount of meat the US consumes compared to any other country. They consume an absolute ton of stuff. And there's no way the US is going to produce that all themselves. And so there will be a trade deficit. And that's what happens when you have a rich country that wants to buy loads of stuff. And there you go. But it's neither good nor bad. It's just like the idea that he thinks that by buying more stuff from Canada that Canada buys from the US, it's somehow the US is subsidizing Canada. It's just stupidity. Anyway, he goes, billions of dollars to subsidize Canada. Why? There is no reason. We don't need anything they have. Clearly you do. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a trade deficit, you plonker. We have unlimited energy. We make our own cars and have more lumber than we can ever use. Without this massive subsidy, Canada ceases. Well, if you want cheaper things, then often you need to get them from abroad. Otherwise, your things are more expensive, and then your consumers are paying higher prices, and they can afford less other things because they're having to spend more on a thing that you are insisting gets built and entirely sourced from within your own country. I mean, Trump, you're an absolute dingbat. You don't understand anything. So stop being the leader of the free world, please. Just please stop it. So without that massive subsidy, it's not a subsidy. Canada ceases to exist as a viable country. Shut up. Harsh but true. No. Therefore, Canada should become our cherished 51st state. So therefore, we should invade Canada and own Canada. Much lower taxes and far better military protection. They've been fine with military protection so far. Thank you very much. That's why you have Article 5 from NATO. For the people of Canada, and no tariffs. You don't need tariffs. You're the one deciding to put tariffs on. That's like saying to Doris next door, just smashing up her fence and then saying, well, if you paid me more money, you wouldn't have a smashed up fence. You were the one that smashed up the fence. So, yeah, but you wouldn't get smashed up fence if you didn't pay me money. Why should I pay you money? Otherwise, I'll smash up your fence. You're not very nice, are you? No, I'm not. I'm a bastard neighbour. Okay. Then we have Levitt, the press secretary, saying she says at the end of the clip that fentanyl has killed tens of millions of Americans. And this is unreality. This is, how you get to fascism is you just lie and lie and lie to the audience, and no one appears to be able to question you.
Hey, friends at Reuters are reporting that the president has made a decision on the Canada and Mexico tariffs, but that they won't actually be implemented until March 1st. I was wondering if you could confirm that and talk through some of the president's thinking.
I saw that report, and it is false. I was just with the president in the Oval Office, and I can confirm that tomorrow, the February 1st deadline that President Trump put into place at a statement several weeks ago, continues. The president will be implementing tomorrow a 25% tariffs on Mexico, 25% tariffs on Canada, and a 10% tariff on China for the illegal fentanyl that they have sourced and allowed to distribute into our country, which has killed tens of millions of Americans.
So, and it hasn't. It hasn't killed tens of millions of Americans. In fact, over how many years? 20 years, it's killed 1.174 million people. That's a lot of people. Don't get me wrong. It's horrible. Yeah? Fentanyl is bad. But you can't, it's like Trump saying 60 million Russians sacrificed for, the winning of World War II. No, that wasn't true. Actually, 7 to 10 million Russians, 26 million from maybe all around the region, including Belarus and Ukraine and blah, blah, blah. It's not 60 million. Stop lying to us. It's not tens of millions of people that died. From 2003 to 2023, 1.174 million. That's just over 1 million. It's not tens of millions. If we allow them to get away with these little lies all the time, then you cannot decipher what is true from untrue, fact from fiction. This is an absolute chaos of disinformation and misinformation. And it's not acceptable. It's not acceptable that we allow people to get away with this. So if you're someone that's like, oh, stop having a go at Trump, no, You start having a go at your own people for lying to you. It's not acceptable. It's not acceptable that I lie to you. And if I lie, call me out on it. I don't lie, but if it's accidental, call me out on it, right? And I will try and correct myself. As you should do for everyone, including your own, especially your own. So if you're a big Trump fan, how about you look at your own people? Look in the mirror at yourself and how you are justifying this. And you're coming on my threads and spending your time going, oh, X, Y, and Z, in twisting yourself into a pretzel to defend Donald Trump and his people. You are defending lies. Donald Trump says that people will understand that prices will go up because of his tax tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China. So, and interestingly, he knows that this is damaging because he's actually lowered some of the tariffs on some of those key industries like energy. So if you like that's an admission, that you know they are going to damage your own industry because you want to actually soften some of the damage in certain sectors.
You promised Americans to try to reduce costs, and so many of the products that would be tariffed when they come into the country, the outgoing country is not paying the tariff. The buyers in the United States pay that, and then that's passed on to consumers in most instances.
Sometimes.
What do you mean sometimes? Literally all the time.
How would you expect to have prices come down if you have such a broad plan for?
What does he mean sometimes? Like the only times that price isn't passed on to the consumer is if that importer sinks the extra tariff, the extra cost, right? And so they're making less profit, which generally, if they're going to do that over a prolonged period of time, then they will put up their prices because, otherwise this is a tax on that individual company. But usually it's a tax on the consumer because that price just gets passed on. How is he saying sometimes? Other than that situation, like what are these scenarios where that tariff is being borne out by entities outside of the US? I don't get it. So no, it's not sometimes.
Tariffs, and what do you say to the voters who want to see you reduce everyday costs?
Well, let me just tell you that I got elected for a lot of reasons. Number one was the border. Number two
Lies.
was inflation, because I had almost no inflation. And yet I charged hundreds of billions of dollars of tariffs to countries. And I think
if he's talking about 2016 to 2020, do you remember he put tariffs on agricultural produce and there was a trade war with China? And then 92% of the income he got from tariffs in the agricultural industry went to subsidizing the farmers who lost all that money.
I had almost no inflation and I took in $600 billion of money from other countries.
And then paid it out to the people that suffered.
Tariffs don't cause inflation, they cause success. Cause big success. So we're going to have great success. There could be some temporary short-term disruption, and people will understand that. I had that when I negotiated some of the good deals for the farmers, and unfortunately.
There you go. So he's admitting farmers, he had to bail them out. He's admitting there are going to be some short-term pains, potentially from Trump's first post today. So this is then today. Rantings of a Madman, says Ron Filikowski. All of this in caps, apart from the first question. All of this in caps. Drugs and pharmaceuticals, as an example. This will be the golden age of America. Will there be some pain? Yes, maybe, and maybe not. But we will make America great again. I mean, great again when it's got the best functioning economy in the world right now. Anyway, but we will make America great again, and it will be worth the price that must be paid. We are a country that is now being run with common sense, and the results will be spectacular. And this is a typical sort of pro idiocy handle source. So the Inevitable West is one of these horrible accounts on Twitter. That says, breaking, President Trump says he plans to put tariffs on the European Union. And then this is just irritates me so much. The EU effed around and found out. The EU effed around and found out. As Europe Defender says, what does that even mean, effed around and found out? The EU didn't even do anything apart from trusting the US as an ally and a friend, for which it now gets stabbed in the back. What's the EU been doing that's effing around with the US? He's just doing trade and trying to think about a war that's happening on its eastern borders, from which the US seem to be effing around and finding out themselves. Flip-flopping all over. It's just absolute insanity. Anyway, this is Justin Trudeau.
Will have real consequences for you, the American people.
Tariffs.
As I have consistently said, tariffs against Canada will put your jobs at risk, potentially shutting down American auto assembly plants and other manufacturing facilities. They will raise costs for you, including food at the grocery stores and gas at the pump. They will impede your access to an affordable supply of vital goods crucial for U.S. security, such as nickel, potash, uranium, steel, and aluminum. They will violate the free trade agreement that the President and I, along with our Mexican partner, negotiated and signed a few years ago. But it doesn't have to be this way. As President John F. Kennedy said many years ago, geography has made us neighbors, history has made us friends, economics has made us partners, and necessity has made us allies.
Absolutely spot on. John Sweeney, usually casting his opinion on the war in Ukraine, says this.
Day 1074 of Russia's war against Ukraine. Donald Trump, faced with all the challenges from the Chinese Communist Party and Russian fascism, has slapped sanctions on Canada and Mexico. And in return, the Canadian government is slapping sanctions on the United States. And there's a very, very powerful and moving speech by the Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, where he sets out with great regret why he's doing this. By the way, we must stand by Canada. And I want to say to the people in the Bell factory behind me, come on, stand up for Canada. Remember our history. Remember what happened in 1914, the Kaiser's Germany invades Belgium. The Americans sit it out till 1917, but the Canadians join us in war against the Kaiser's Germany. And again, in 1939, we go to war because Germany's invaded Poland, and we fight the Nazis. We don't do it on our own, we fight it with the whole of what's now the Commonwealth, Canada included. My father was a ship's engineer in the Battle of the Atlantic in the Merchant Navy. And when they got to Iceland, the Royal Navy turned back to Britain and the Royal Canadian Navy took over. And my dad has wonderful memories when the weather was good of getting Canadian supplies from Beaches Boys. Canadian maple, Canadian bacon, and slightly naughtily, Canadian whiskey. The next few days, I'm going to buy all three on the internet. And I'm going to stand by Canada. I worry desperately about my friends in Ukraine, but it's clear that Donald Trump isn't that interested in what's going on there. Vive le Canada. Donald Trump, do fuck off. Oh, and Vladimir Putin, do fuck off.
And what's interesting about this is you are going to get erstwhile allies of the US coalescing around a common theme of being anti-US. The US is soft power. They turned off US aid for 90 days. That's the US's soft power projection around the world. Stop all the funding. All these organizations now screwed over. People are resenting America. Like, okay. Then it's like, let's pick on all our allies and we're going to tariff them. So you are going to get, and I was watching Vivek Cooper on Laura Kunzberg today, you know, being questioned about, well, are you going to start doing, you know, you're going to start being a little bit closer to Canada. And like, I think you are going to get Europe, UK, and Canada, for example, we heard Mark Carney sort of intimate this the other night as well, the former Bank of England chief, Canadian, who is running for leader of the Liberal Party to replace Justin Trudeau potentially. He also talking about a closer union and more in common with some of these other nations than maybe the US. You might have an eschewing of US power from if the EU steps up now big time and gets together with Canada, even with Mexico, and you are getting a fracturing of the global world order with the US at the top of the hegemonic ladder, and it's not going to end well. But it might be a case of the US is now no longer a reliable ally. And they're no longer a reliable ally because Donald Trump and his administration and the Project 2025 wingnuts that are atop of that ladder. It is, I think, an absolute disgrace that I think Ukraine is being treated in the way it is and has been, and I think they're trying their hardest to make the most out of a Trump presidency. But there's no communication from Trump that he cares about the moral outcome for Ukraine. Things are only transactional, which is how he's treating his allies. Look, if he's going around slapping tariffs on his mates, he's not going to care one iota for Ukraine outside of what he can extract from Ukraine for the benefit of the US. Now, if you are still some massive Trump fan, then there's
War
not,
Diary Day 1007.
there's not a lot I can say to you. There's not a lot I can do to disabuse of this, because the hold of a cult of personality is that this guy is a divine leader, is a sort of demigod or a god, and any kind of criticism is blasphemy. And if you are sitting just really upset that someone from outside your country has insulted Donald Trump, then get over it. Get over it, because there's every chance then, if you're really upset with what I'm saying, that you exist in a cult, and that I've written several articles on criticism of Trump being blasphemy. If you create, if you see him in these kind of divine manners, this is something you should never do with a single human being. People do this with Elon Musk as much as they do it with Trump, which is they forgive every problematic aspect because their own identity is so wrapped up with this other person that a criticism of Musk or a criticism of Trump is a criticism of you, and that can't happen. And so everything that Trump or Musk does has to be amazing. In the same way, this is exactly with God thought. So when and I've written books on this, goodness me, you can go and please help me out by getting, I don't know, my latest book, which was 30 Arguments Against the Existence of God, Heaven, Hell, Satan, and Divine Design. So in that, the idea that God is omniscient, all-knowing, omnipotent, all-powerful, and omnibenevolent, all-loving. If you adhere to that classical theism, that classic understanding of God in those omni characteristics, what I call omni-God, then you are constrained to have to interpret everything in the universe through that lens. So when a tsunami kills 240,000 people, you can't find any criticism of God. That has to be perfect. And there has to be a really good reason why that happened, and it couldn't be 220,000 people that died. It has to be 240,000 people. Not one fewer person could have died, because otherwise that would have happened if God was all loving. So what happens is you get into this mode of thought whereby God can do no wrong, because literally God can do no wrong, because God is omnibenevolent. And you are just dutifully looking at all terrible things and saying, God moves in mysterious ways, but I'm sure it's necessary for this perfect kind of, somehow this being a perfect world, because God is a perfect creator, etc., etc. Okay, don't want to get too much into theology there, but exactly the same thought process goes on with like Trump and Musk, which is, I've really gone full in on my support for Trump, or really gone full in on my support for Musk. I loved what they did there. They're saying all the right things here. And then you get slowly, you get introduced to more problematic things that otherwise, if someone like George Soros would have done that, or someone on the left would have done that, you'd go, you'd have a short circuit and explode. But because your God is infallible, your Trump God or your Musk God is infallible, you have to sync that. And you have to generate these, like, you gerrymander your own mental geography to be able to contort yourself into a situation whereby that's somehow acceptable. These tariffs are a great idea. Good on Trump. America first. Let's attack all our allies. Yeah, somehow that's a great idea. I love, you're so deep into Trump world that it's just he has to be perfect. He is perfect, so everything he does has to be perfect, and you can't nuance with that with like, oh, I liked what he did over there, but that really sucks. If you feel you can't criticize Trump or Musk, if you feel you can't for one moment criticize those people, then you live in a self-imposed cult. You need to sort that out, because at the moment the guy's being an absolute dick, and he's going around and he's destroying alliances, long held, hard fought over alliances, at a time when those alliances need to be the very strongest they possibly can. We need to be the most united we have understood since World War II. We need to be that, because Russia is there, China is there, Iran is there, and North Korea is there. That's the time that this man and his minions decide to go nuts and go Captain Chaos. Utterly unacceptable.